Customer service, English, paint and hobby division. Oh, hello, Nigel, is it? Say, thanks. I just have a real quick question for you. It's in regards to one of your newer products called Technical Contrast Medium. Say, is this just the special ingredient that makes contrast paint work how it does? It is? Excellent. Hello again, friends. Games Workshop's contrast paints have been out for over a year at this point, and you're probably familiar with them. But ever since that paint came out, one thing really stood out to me and intrigued me, and that was their contrast medium. And today, we're going to dig into that. So the contrast medium really is the magical elixir that makes the contrast paints what they are. Games Workshop claims that if you add more of this medium to the contrast paints, it properly thins them down. But I wonder, if in fact this medium is what makes the contrast paints what they are, doesn't that just mean we can make our own? The first thing I want to do to test this contrast medium is to actually see if we can make our own with our own paints. If we could just make any acrylic paint that we already own into contrast paint, I think we probably just made the whole product obsolete. So let's check that out. And I also want to check it out with inks. I was thinking that maybe that they used inks for the actual pigment in the contrast paints instead of just regular acrylic paint pigment. So here's our results for all three. I'll let you decide if you think that they hold up well to each other and that if you could, in fact, with just the medium, create your own contrast paints with inks or with your own acrylic paints. But you know, when I was doing this test, I've actually been using a new product that's been out for a little while now, and it acted in a really interesting way, and I loved how it worked. And I thought perhaps this would be the key to replicating contrast paints for a fraction of the price. Enter Monument Hobbies transparent paint line. These transparent paints are really strong and intense straight out of the bottle, and that's a good thing. You see, we can always thin them down, and we're going to try to do that with this contrast medium. But unlike the contrast paints, these will always start very intense. This is an issue I have with the contrast line in general, and I think many others have experienced this as well. Some are very strong, some are very intense, but others are really weak, and it really limits what we can do with those. So our subject for today is this 3D printed orc by Artisans Guild. I really like the look of these orcs in their World of Warcraft kind of aesthetic to them. And when I paint him, I'm gonna go with that lively, vibrant colors. And we'll see if these paints can actually achieve that kind of a scheme. I started by priming him in a Stynylrez gray primer. Both Stynylrez and Vallejo create a gray primer that is quite light, and it worked really well for this. We're gonna get right into setting up our palette. What I did is I used every single color of the transparent range on my palette. I wanted to have them all at the ready so I could mix my colors on the fly and mix, in theory, any contrast color I needed. So when I started laying down this green base coat for his skin, a little green, a little yellow, a little contrast medium, a little water too, to thin it down and get to the consistency I want, and let's see how it works. So what does your eye tell you when you're seeing how this paint is being applied as a base coat on the model? I'll tell you what I see. I see contrast paint. It looks like contrast paint, it acts like contrast paint, but there's one big difference. Because we have all these primary and secondary colors to start from, we can mix whatever color we want and go from there. So I like how things are turning out from a base coat perspective in comparison to contrast paints, but I don't want to stop there. We're going to end up trying out some non-metallic metal with this stuff later on. But to start, we just need to get the base coats down for the armor. We'll mix up some black and blue to get a desaturated grayish blue tone. This will be our base tone for all the armor. I found it pretty easy and had a lot of fun to actually boost up our colors in the shadows in this project. Because the paint works somewhat transparently, even more so if we add more contrast medium, we can actually build up shadows slowly and even add new colors to the shadows as we go. I didn't worry about making everything too perfect and precise here, and it turns out works pretty well. I tell you, it is a lot of fun and pretty liberating to have all the colors on your palette that you're gonna need, because you can mix just about whatever you need with this transparent line. I didn't feel like I needed to always find the next perfect color for this bag or satchel or boots. I just mixed some stuff together. Did I like how it turned out? No, maybe I'll add a little bit of another color. Oh, now it's looking good. Let's just go with it. It really was liberating, and it is a good practice for mixing colors for other kinds of projects later on. So as I'm recording this, I just assume that I can't use the word contrast unless I'm talking about the contrast paint, because that's just going to confuse everybody. So, I don't know. Need to come up with a different word, I guess. One of the main keys to creating a realistic looking metal is to having a really stark contrast between dark and light, sometimes in a very small space. So this really dark shadow is right next to the brightest highlight. We don't need to achieve this all in one square go, so I'm going to try to just work it my way through here with a bunch of layers, try to really build up some deeper, darker tones, and then I'm going to work back into my lighter tones as we go. In this project, like most of my painting projects, I find myself hopping all around from one section of the model to the other. Ooh, something interests me over here on the belts, or oh, now I'm feeling excited about painting the sword. I find that this way really helps me get through a model without ever getting completely stuck or frustrated with anything. Go with what excites me. Whatever part of the model I want to paint next or most excites me to work on a little bit more, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to put up those extra barriers in front of my fun. I mean, sometimes we can get to a point where nothing about a model excites us, or I don't even want to sit down and pick up the paintbrush and even begin because I'm not excited. In those moments, what I do is I make myself do it anyway. Pick up the paintbrush, put paint on it, hold the model, see what happens. I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, within 5 to 10 minutes, you will actually find something that excites you. But I get it. Sometimes the most difficult part is just starting. As you can see, the upward facing surfaces of the skin and muscles are now adding a more of a yellow, brightish tint to them, which does add more depth, and we're getting a little closer to where we want to end up. Now we're really going to start to put in some work on these metals. How we do this is we add some white to our base color. This is going to make our color a little bit more opaque because of the actual white paint, as well as brighten it up a bit. And we're just going to go over those spots we want to have more highlights on. No single pass is going to completely change the model. This is kind of a fun way to do it too. You can't screw it all up in one go. In each successive layer, we're going to add more white, increasing opacity, increasing the vibrancy, until eventually we are going to work with pure white for those brightest points on the armor. I was thinking that maybe some of you might be interested in purchasing this paint if you don't always own the Monument line. So I reached out to Jason and Jen, and they were gracious enough to give us a special coupon and link for purchase. So if you're interested, you can click the link below. And I get a little bit of a kickback at no additional cost to you if you purchase any of their paints, brushes, or other hobby products. As well, if you type in the keyword Ninjon in the coupon box, you get another 5% off your entire order. Thank you, Monument Hobbies, for your support. As always, when I find myself getting closer and closer to the end of a project, I start working on smaller and smaller details. I'm going to add some what I call micro textures or scratches on this model as well, just like I usually do. I find that these last final details often are what make the difference between a good-looking model and a great-looking model. So I'd encourage you to try to find these last finishing touches and add those to your painting style to really help boost you to the next level. And whenever I do these scratches, we need to add some depth and dimension to them. So any of my white or silver or bright colors that I use to make these little scratches, I often go through with this black line to add some dimension and depth to look like there is actually a little dent or a scuff or a hole there. And that black really sells the effect. Okay, final thoughts. Well, was it worth it? Did it work out? Did we make our own contrast paint? Well, it's not exactly contrast paint. That doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's amazing. I think it's a new tool. I think I'll use this style of painting more and more. And there's some things even in my standard day-to-day painting where I don't use a lot of contrast paint, I can integrate, whether it's from the transparent line, whether it's using the contrast medium to create more filters, whether it's just understanding that I can buy the contrast medium instead of all of those bottles of contrast paint for $8 a pop. Something to be said about the amount of money that we can save and still open ourselves to a lot of tools in our painting toolbox. Will I stop using contrast paints? No. I mean, there are some times where just having the pre-mixed color right there, especially if I'm doing an army and want to replicate it 100 times over, it's going to have some value. But if I'm doing an army and it's $8 a bottle for that stuff, maybe I shouldn't be using that contrast in the first place. That's just me though. There's still some value in that product, just like there are in almost every hobby product. Will I go out and buy more and more contrast paints though? Probably not. I'll use what I have, and as I need to get that effect with contrast paints, I'm just going to mix some transparent paints of my own. And with that, I appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out. If you enjoyed this one, you know what to do. Some more... Shoot. Nope, that's really it. Thanks, Nigel. I appreciate your time. I don't have any other questions. Wait. You know what? As long as I have you here. Now, hear me out, Nigel. I know it sounds crazy, but just go with me for a second on this one. Think about it. Dropper bottles. Oh, don't you lie to me, Nigel. You know it's true. You know you do it. You make all those null oil bottles top heavy so they fall over and spill, and we gotta buy more. Nigel, I'm only asking this one because I really care. Do you use a wet palette? Okay, on 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Rhinox hide. Jinx.